afternoon, Mr. Kamel Ben-Naceur. Welcome to Al-Attiyah Foundation activity. Mr. Kamel, first, let us start with your current consultancy company. You are the CEO of Nomadia Energy Consulting. What does it do? What are the strengths of this consultancy? After such a long and multinational career, is the name in reference of your somewhat nomadic career?
Good afternoon, Randa. It's a great pleasure to be interviewed by you and the Al-Attiyah Foundation. We do share the principles of Al-Attiyah Foundation in terms of sustainability and making sure that our planet is left in good standing for the generations to come. So about Nomadia Energy, it's about advising stakeholders on issues related to the energy transition. Those stakeholders include governments, public institutions, private organizations, and also financial companies. The strength of Nomadia Energy is the experience dealing for over 4 decades with the energy sectors, the variety of roles occupied, whether it's public, private, service, international organization, and national companies, the network of international experts, and also collaboration agreements. Defining future options when we try to project it 20 or 30 or even 50 years ago requires a very comprehensive and thorough understanding of what shapes the energy industry. So I personally led a multidisciplinary team and multicultural team of nearly 90 people while I was at the International Energy Agency. Absolutely, I was director for the biggest directorate at the IEA called the Sustainability, Technology and Outlooks. It was a team of about 90 people working with great leadership from Dr. Fatih Birol, who is still the executive director. And so we were publishing very important work like the World Energy Outlook, the Energy Technology Perspectives, but also we were leading a very wide network of what we call technology collaboration programs, which range from fossil fuels to advanced nuclear technologies. So you asked me about Nomadia and the name. It's partly related to the career, as you say. We've lived in 15 countries, and professionally I have covered about 100 countries. It also relates in the name to a beautiful city in Tunisia called Madia, which has played an important role in history, especially with the Fatimid dynasty. So it's Nomad and Madia.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay, and you have been involved in various committees in the Society of Petroleum Engineers in April 2020. You were nominated for the role of president of this society. Were you successful in that nomination? And if so, can you attribute a single part of your career to that success?
So the Society of Petroleum Engineers is the largest international organization of professionals related to the development of energy resources, with nearly 140,000 members in 144 countries. My involvement with the SPE dates back to about 40 years ago, when I published my first technical paper at the annual conference. And this gave me a better understanding of what the SPE was about, which is sharing knowledge and collaboration. I have then contributed to the SPE with different roles. I've authored many papers and journal articles. I've been involved in section committees. I've organized international conferences. I have also contributed to create new committees in emerging disciplines like the carbon capture and storage, the human factors, and the sustainability. About 15 years ago, I was selected to be a distinguished lecturer around the world on the topic of carbon capture storage as a key carbon abatement. So this has led me to give conferences around the globe, from South America to Papua New Guinea, and then from Kansas to Serbia. So I was then selected to the SPE board of directors where I led the technical discipline of management and information. Mm-hmm. So recently, in 2020, I applied for the presidency role, and I was extremely pleased to have been selected. I would be the second African in history to take that position, and the third one from the Middle East, North Africa region. And so I consider that to be an area of pride, and that was the success. So regarding what made the success in terms of being selected, the nominating committee has its own criteria, but I would assume that they might have taken into account my track record with the industry and the SPE, as well as the ability to lead and represent the society on very important matters.
Like what? Can you specify, for example, the role of a president of SPE now?
Okay, so the role of the president of the SPE is to lead the board of directors, which is composed of regional and technical directors, ensure that we adhere to the SPE mission and vision and strategic plan, mm-hmm. And also that we listen to our members, especially when we are going through very difficult times like the one we have seen in 2020, and work with the SPE staff and communicate with the different stakeholders. This could be company management and also public governments and education sector.
Mm-hmm. You started your career with a distinguished achievement, actually. In 1975, you joined as a foreign student at Polytechnique and at École Normale Supérieure. Instead of keeping only one school, you chose to attend both schools and become one of the few in the world to have done this. So why this emphasis on getting academic achievements?
So you bring me back a few years ago. So I was the first Tunisian to have been admitted to both schools. So that was already an area of pride. The École Normale Supérieure in Paris is extremely selective as an academic institution, with less than 50 students out of thousands that are candidates that would be admitted every year in math and physics. It's the organization that has developed the largest number of Fields medals, which is compared to the Nobel Prize in mathematics. In history, there were only 2 Tunisians that have been admitted, actually 1 year before me, and it was a great honor to have succeeded. Mm-hmm. The other point is that my family had a member who went to École Polytechnique earlier. That was my older brother. And so my parents, God bless their soul, would have been at that time very proud to be the first ones in Africa to have had 2 children graduating from the École Polytechnique. So at that time I was 19, and at that age nothing is impossible. So I decided to attend the 2 schools in parallel. And everybody, perhaps except for my parents, told me it was impossible. So it was very tough, but I'm glad it worked well. And I think so far only one other person did that.
And what are the academic interests?
Okay, so my academic interest is about the applications of mathematics to the different areas of engineering. Mm-hmm. And so this covers a very large range because mathematics is everywhere. And so that was the area. But with École Polytechnique, what you get is quite a broad understanding of other fundamental disciplines.
Mm-hmm. Okay, after research at the Paris École des Mines, you joined Schlumberger Research Center to project manage in new technologies. We know that Schlumberger is one of the world's largest oil field service companies. Were you looking at new oil field service technologies, or even now, are you looking at new energy technologies?
So when I was at the École des Mines, at that time, I was already involved with the energy sector because I did research on solar energy and solar sensors at that time. That was 40 years ago. And then I was approached by Schlumberger for their research and development in France. And this is to develop new technology. And if we rewind 40 years ago, what we were saying at that time is that we would have oil only for 40 years. Mm-hmm. And then the resources of the world will be, in oil will be finished by that time. And now we are saying 40 years later, we have oil for the next 60 years. So, and this is thanks to technologies that has been developed. And so what I liked when I joined Schlumberger is that they had a very multicultural environment. And then they also gave excellent financial support to develop new concepts and new projects. Mm-hmm. We also had very great collaboration with academic institutions. So I've spent 10 years there developing new technologies that were implemented in the operations that we were leading around the world. And I was very pleased to see that being applied. So after that, I took on management roles around the globe, Africa, South America, Middle East, and then global worldwide functions. So in 2002, the CEO of Schlumberger asked me to look at this area called carbon capture and storage. And this has completely changed my perspective of, which was initially looking to oil and gas, about a much wider area of the energy and looking at the global energy systems and the sustainability aspects. It was very rich from an experience because then I started engaging with people I would have never engaged, the policymakers, the international organization, and from that standpoint, it was very rich.
Are you still doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. I do it, and I do it with all major international organizations around the world, and I think it is a very enriching dialogue.
But are you still looking into new energy technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the areas that I'm looking at these days is hydrogen. And hydrogen is not exactly new because I was reading a book by the French author Jules Verne, who was talking actually about hydrogen as a potential energy source back in 1860, so 160 years ago. So, but I think now
Which book was it? Just for my information.
It's called The Mysterious Island. It's called L'Île Mystérieuse.
Okay.
And there is a fantastic dialogue there between the captain of the boat, and at that time boats were run with coal, and the scientist. And the captain of the boat was asking the scientist, but what happens when the world runs out of coal? And the scientist told him, well, at that time, we will use hydrogen as an energy source because we can get hydrogen from the separation of water into hydrogen and oxygen. And this would give a perpetual energy source. So he was 160 years ahead of his time.
Wow, fantastic. It's interesting. Okay. And now you're working mainly on what field in the new technology area?
So hydrogen is one of the areas. Carbon capture and storage is another area, but also working with countries to look at their future outlooks for the next 20 or 30 years, and defining the energy scenarios, but also working with new countries that have discovered oil and gas resources to make sure that they develop it in a sustainable way.
Okay. In 2014, you were appointed Minister of Energy and Mines in Tunisia. Can you talk about it? Why it was such a short time that you were minister?
So actually, the short ministerial career, which was about 1 year and 2 months, was by design and by choice. Mr. Mehdi Jom'a, who was appointed to lead the government in Tunisia after a very delicate period for the country, contacted me to take on the role, which was actually industry, energy, and mines. I had very little time to respond, but I accepted because it was my duty to give back to my country what I had received in terms of free education. And so the understanding was that the team, the ministerial team, would lead the country towards the first fully democratic elections while restoring the economic fundamentals and also the security. Mm-hmm. We would then pass on the baton after those elections to the government that would result from the elections. We did that, and we ensured that an excellent succession process, which had never happened in country's history, would happen for every ministry. Mm-hmm. I can tell you it was a very tough period, a year and 2 months, without any day to pause or relax. Very few moments of relaxing. Actually, we would play football together, and actually including the female members of the government, who, by the way, played very well football. So
that's good.
Yeah. So after the elections, while I specifically mentioned that my mission was finished and that I had served my country, I was actually considered for the position of Prime Minister in 2015. I was one of the 2 final candidates, and I was very pleased that they took the other candidate, Mr. Habib Assid, because actually I was not applying for the position.
Mm-hmm. But during your time as a minister, you were involved in the decision to phase out fuel subsidies. Well, this is now looked upon as conventional wisdom. Perhaps then it was more controversial. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so fuel subsidies, which were both in the electricity and the liquid fuels, had increased a lot in the country, especially since 2011, due to a number of reasons, which included also the increase in fuel prices, but also the increase in consumption, to the point that they represented a significant part of the country's budget. And they were preventing the country from investments in its development. Mm-hmm. The other factor, which was very negative, is that those subsidies did not go to the people that need them the most. And so they would go to individuals and businesses that could afford to pay for the real energy price. Why should the government, the country, pay for the overconsumption of cars like SUVs or for luxury villas with plenty of air conditioning? That was a distortion of the subsidy system. Mm-hmm. So fuel subsidies like that was an unfair distribution of public resources. So they inhibit development, and even in industry, if you don't apply them right, then they just do not help the economy in the long run. So what we did is that we had a countrywide consultation before engaging in the reform of the subsidies to ensure that we listen to all the stakeholders. And actually we applied it, we started applying it in some of the industrial sector, like the cement sector, which is very important for the construction. And actually the Tunisian application of the subsidy removal on the cement sector became an international case study, because what happened at the end of the game is that the consumer gained, the country gained, and the industry gained.
Kemal, as you know, Qatar has left OPEC because it was not happy with its influence as a small producer. Did Tunisia ever consider joining OPEC? And what of OPEC, which Tunisia is a member of? Is it a useful organization to be a member of?
So, as you say, the voice in organization like OPEC, by design, or the amount of influence, has a relationship with the reserves and then the quota mechanism. So Tunisia never had a production that would make it any significant, and so there was no rationale to join OPEC because you wouldn't have a meaningful vote. If you represent 0.1% of the production, then what's the objective? So from that standpoint, that was the rationale. Regarding the OPEC, which Tunisia joined in 1982, we fully supported the objectives of harmonization of legal systems, information and experience exchange, and also establishing joint projects. So, for instance, Tunisia has established with its two neighbors, the brother governments of Algeria and Libya, with each one of them a joint venture. And for Libya, we have joint oil, and with Algeria, we have Nomad. So from that standpoint, it's a beneficial participation. We hear less about OPEC than OPEC, obviously, given the current economic role of OPEC, but I think that OPEC has a role to play.
Yeah. Having a great interest in renewable energy, will you be attending COP26 as an advisor or observer or organization? If so, what do you expect and your hopes of COP26?
So there are big expectations for COP26. In 2020 and up to 2020, countries that represented nearly 50% of the global economy, like China, the European Union, Canada, some of the states in the US, had committed to near zero emission by 2050, 50% of the global economy. And so the signing by President Biden of the order related to the US back in the Paris Accord is extremely important. So there are expectations that given that momentum, there will be a significant progress in Glasgow at the end of this year at COP26. And on myself, I'm currently involved in reports for COP26 related to zero carbon fuels and hydrogen.
You will be going there?
it's likely that I will be going there, but obviously it depends on the current situation with the pandemic.
Okay. Do you think the world will have really met the zero carbon emission, dioxide emission by 2050? If so, do you think there will be a dominant technology, or will it be the mix of technologies with local solutions?
So getting to net zero by 2050 for the world is possible. Mm-hmm. And there are several sources that provide analysis of those options, like the IPCC or the International Energy Agency or other outlooks. So it's possible. What it would require to do that is a mix of policies, technologies, and also behavioral change in the world. And the cost of moving to a sustainable pathway has been deemed much lower than the cost of addressing the impact of climate change. So mitigating and taking the right measures today would cost significantly less than having to repair the damage. So it's something that we have to invest for the future generation.
But do you think it's being done? Do you think we're heading to this?
I think that I mentioned that all those countries that have taken the objectives of near zero emissions, and for instance, the European Union has adopted its Green Deal, which is quite aggressive in terms of objectives. And China has the history of taking to their engagement and applying it. So if you have such large economies like those two agreeing, it gives you good hope, and hopefully the United States.
Okay.
So, and what we have seen with the pandemic is that when the world decides to mobilize for a cause, we can find a solution in a record amount of time. Nobody would have thought before the pandemic that you could develop a vaccine in less than a year. And now we're having a whole series of vaccines. So I'm optimistic that countries with the right mix of policies to address carbon can achieve sustainability. And so you asked me what would be the components. I think that the biggest one would be energy efficiency. You also need other ones. You need to mix. One technology would not be sufficient. So you need to have renewables, and the cost decrease in solar and wind is a very good news for the world. Electrification is important, and also the reuse and recycling. But also the world needs to have carbon capture, utilization, and storage to achieve a whole lower cost for the reduced carbon footprint. So these are the main components of the energy mix.
Thank you.
And I would just add that in that mix, I'm convinced that natural gas is playing a very important role and will continue to play an important role in that mix, because from the fossil fuels is by far the much cleaner source, and if it's combined with carbon capture and storage, it's almost carbon free.
Okay, thank you very much, Kemal. I believe it's all for today, and on behalf of Al-Attiyah Foundation, I would like to thank you.